Well, good evening, everyone. I'm so happy you could make it here tonight. Tonight we're going to explore just who's running the show in arts organizations and go a little bit behind the scenes, which is different than what we usually do. Now, arts boards face the same challenges and issues as regular boards. The occasional dysfunctional dynamics, disengaged board members, or blurry responsibilities and roles. But arts boards are actually very special in that they have the unique challenge of also needing to produce really excellent art. So, I'm really excited to explore this topic tonight because I'm about to join my first arts board. So this is a really great opportunity for me. I cannot tell you. I cannot tell you yet.
That doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem very transparent, does it?
I'm still new to this. I'm here to learn. But we're really lucky to have both the arts side and the board governance side covered tonight. So our first speaker will be Robert Foster. He's the founder, president, and CEO of Capital Canada, an independent investment banking firm, the chair of Artscape, the Vice Chair of Business for the Arts, and also a member of the Harbourfront Centre Board. In the past, he's also served on the board of Luminato and was co-chair of the Mayor's Task Force on Arts and Theatre. So I think you know a fair bit about board governance. And our second speaker is our tall friend from the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. Now, such a tall, I mean, large player in the culture sector hardly needs an introduction, but I should probably throw out a couple highlights. So before joining the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, Jeff ran the Banff Centre, the Royal Conservatory of Music's Community School, and Canada's National Ballet School. So you have almost got the full collection of arts organizations under your belt.
I'm a triple threat.
Really, yeah. So I think that we're in good hands. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to our speakers, and welcome to Salon West. So before I open it up to the floor for some questions, I think you might have some initial thoughts about our topic, being the expert here, so I leave it to you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Delighted to join everyone. Let me begin by saying that the thesis of my comments is that there is an evolution going on now in the corporate world as to governance. It is becoming increasingly focused and challenging, and I will talk about that with you. It's my view that the pressure on governance on public companies is going to, and indeed is, moving down to the not-for-profit sector. And if we are not aware of what's going on, we're going to find out, and it's going to be difficult for us. So best to be ready, to start doing your homework, and to get ready for the changes that will hit the not-for-profit sector. At the moment, we look at board members in the not-for-profit sector and we ask ourselves, do we invite someone on the board to be a fundraiser? Are they a cheerleader? Are they a rubber stamp to approve whatever management brings forward? Did we invite somebody on the board because they're great window dressing, it's a fancy name, or they're rich and famous and we think they're going to be major contributors? Then we have to ask, if they're on the board, are they doing a good job? Do they help run the organization? Should they have that role? And when is it time for them to go? And we're going to come back to all of those because, for example, on time to go, there's now pressure on time limits for board members of publicly run companies. This is new, and I sit on the board of a large public company. We've yet to answer that question, but it's in front of us as well, and it's going to be in front of all of us. And then, by the way, are they doing a good job? We now have questionnaires we have to answer. Whatever committee you serve on, I happen to serve on executive audit and comp. We have long questionnaires assessing ourselves, assessing our committee, then we have them for the board as well. So it becomes very much self-testing, and then we have the head of internal audit who reviews all these and tells us how well or not we're doing in those roles. So when one sees all of that, you say, well, you know, are we really important? Do we actually matter to the whole system? There's a new UNESCO report out, which I would encourage everyone to look at, which says that the creative and the cultural sector produces $2.25 billion of economic activity a year around the world. It represents 3% of the world GNP. It employs 29.5 million people, and the revenues exceed those of the telecom industry, and it employs more people than the automobile industry in Europe, Japan, and the USA combined. So it's a very, very important part of the ecosystem, the economic system. And people move in and out of the not-for-profit to the for-profit in terms of the creative world. So we are linked, and we watch people go back and forth. If you go down to Chorus Entertainment on the waterfront, you'll see that right there. They have their own art gallery for their own employees to show their work, and they pride themselves in watching employees see their work move out of there into commercial galleries. So it's a good example of the fertilization back and forth that goes on. So where is the corporate world today? There are two organizations. One is called ISS, Institutional Shareholder Services, and the other Glass Lewis. They assess corporations, and they then recommend to the shareholders whether they should vote for each and every indirect director. And by the way, now you can no longer put forward a slate of directors. Each director has to run on their own. So ISS and Glass Lewis come along, and they rank you. And they say, vote for him, vote for her, don't vote for him. And believe me, directors are very nervous of all of this. So it's changed everybody's behavior. And we all know how Glass Lewis works. They are, at the moment, their current big issue is what they call director overboarding. What's overboarding? It means serving on too many boards. So they have decided you can't serve on more than 4 boards. And if you're more than 4 boards, they're going to get you kicked off one. And they're doing it. So they look at what we're all doing, what our contributions are, your attendance, but it goes well beyond that. One expert said, in the last 3 years, regulatory and shareholder activists have put the heat on boards of directors in a way I have not seen in a generation. So this all comes after Sarbanes-Oxley, and it's serious stuff. So when you look at it, here's a little example of how complicated this world is getting. ISS's stock option analysis model uses 44 different linear regression variables and a binomial regression analysis to calculate the cost of the plan. Nobody knows what it means, but I can tell you, it's got us all
We do that
worried.
at the TSO, actually.
Right. The G20 under Mark Carney is now going to set up a system whereby they're going to require corporations to consider the physical liability and transition risks associated with climate change. So now, you know, we're all going to have to worry about what's the impact of climate change on our organization. What if there's a flood? What if there's a hurricane? What if there's a snowstorm that, you know, goes on and on, whatever. So that's the world we're going into. A man named Leslie Rosenthal, who's VP Legal Counsel for the Lincoln Center, has written about this, and he talks about the misconceptions about corporate governance, and are we there just as fundraisers, et cetera, and goes on and talks about the large mix of stakeholders that the not-for-profit serves, the complex economic model we have, and the lack of external accountability. And one of the issues is 2 organizations I know, both of whom are sitting up here, The board is elected by the members, but to be a member, you must be on the board. And we've been getting away with that for a long, long time. How long that's going to go on, I don't know. But it's a very incestuous, tight little circle that we've created for ourselves. And that is going to get challenged. The board generally is recognized as having decision-making powers for matters of policy, direction, strategy, and governance. So those are all issues that are being thrown at boards today. It's important for a board to recognize that they have to be independent of management, which means your board must have an in-camera session, something my wife Julia taught me. And I've now introduced to boards, and it's the moment when the board can have an open conversation about the issues that they think are important. So if your boards aren't doing in-camera, you must do it. Now, corporate governance says for public companies they're required to do it, but you really will find it enormously helpful, and it gives people who are on a board and sit there and say very little throughout the meeting, you'd be shocked. They've all got views, they've all got something to add, and that's the opportunity they're given to really make a contribution to the board and the organization and where it's going. So, no marquee names. Who do you want on your board? You want to sit down and say, okay, what are the jobs? What do we have to do here? And what are the roles that we have to fill? So if you look at that, you have obviously an executive committee. I would argue an executive committee is there for emergency only and should not meet regularly. The board should. You have an audit committee, you have governance, nominations, compensation, government relations, strategic planning, stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders? Are they represented? Should they be represented on the board itself? And then finally, anything that's unique to your organization. So in Artscape, we're really a real estate company. We call ourselves creative placemakers. We have all sorts of other nice things, but push to shove, it's about real estate. So we built a real estate team on the board, second to none, and nothing gets done without that team assessing whatever it is we're going to do, and they come to the board and say, this is our assessment, this is what we think of it, this is how we should proceed. So the board meeting is really a series of reports from all of these people. Now I sit on other boards where CEO comes in and just talks the whole time, and the board is really a rubber stamp, and that is not a model that's going to survive, let me tell you. And you'll get a better organization anyway if you have this level of activity from everybody. There's an interesting academic paper that was done on governance in the arts, and their conclusion was governance is still viewed as a narrow concept where board members are mainly passive, basically rubber stamping decisions for the benefit of external funders. Well, that may be true, but that is not going to survive. So my message to you is, look at what's happening in the outside world, get ready for it, and participate. So the final thing I'll say is, if you want to see an interesting model, the Canada Council for the Arts Governance Policy. And it's constantly updated. This is October 2015 is the most recent update. Good document, good guide as to how to tackle all of these issues. Partner, over to you.
Wow, good job. I guess I would say a couple of things in response to Robert. We're not here to debate each other, thankfully, because as you see, he's come with a pack of papers and is very well prepared, and I'm wearing a scarf. When people ask me what our ideal board member would look like, and I don't want to embarrass anybody, look something like this guy right here.
That's why we love one another.
Somebody who's passionate, thoughtful, connected, can help you move the needle, get things done, while also holding your feet to the fire in terms of accountability and deliverables and so on. So not to embarrass you too much, but you're the ideal model. I will also say that we're at the Spoke Club tonight. As you can hear, people all around us are having a great time, and some of them probably know the arts people are on this floor. and we're silently talking about governance. So if you could, just for my sake and for everyone else's sake here, let's hear it for Robert in his preparation presentation tonight. Hey, Robert! All right. So now down to business. So everything Robert said is true. When he was going through the list, do we want cheerleaders? Do we want marquee names? Do we want rich and famous? Do we want people who are moneyed? And so on. I was saying all of those things we do. Yes, absolutely. The challenge in running an arts organization today is that we are living in a world that's changing very rapidly. Running a Toronto Symphony in Toronto, we've got the impact of technology on our business, where young audiences are used to entirely free, high-quality content wherever they are. How do you encourage a young person to buy a ticket to a performance when they have their device and that keeps them fully entertained? We have the impact of a tremendously changing city. We were founded 94 years ago at the Toronto Symphony. 94 years ago, Toronto looked radically different than it does today. And I would say, being very critical of the TSO, if you were to look at our board, our donors, our audience, we do not look like Toronto in any way, shape, or form, and that has to change. So that's a critical strategic issue. We have evolving economic models. You know, running an orchestra today, when I took the job last November, it's about 3 weeks later, the New York Times had a cover story talking about how orchestras all over the world were dying, which is not really the most exciting way to take on a new job. So the economics are shifting radically. So the challenges, in addition to all of the things Robert has outlined in terms of accountability, due diligence, good governance, and so on, are even greater than that in terms of also the strategic challenge. The board is not, in my mind, we can debate this a bit, responsible for establishing the strategy, but vetting the strategy, vetting the business planning, and so on is a critical task. So a board should be asking, maybe we can, this is why Robert actually, this is why I say he's the ideal board member. He's never been on my board, so I don't know that that's actually true. So all of that strategic element is very important. Evaluating my performance is part of the board's job as well. Often done through the executive or compensation committees. In our case, the whole board will discuss my performance once a year. The points Robert made around in-camera sessions, while crazy making, those are very, very important. So at the end of every single TSO board meeting or foundation board meeting, I am dumped out of the room so the board can share whatever they're concerned about in a safe way. That's doubly important in Canada, where often we are very polite and maybe too polite to directly express concerns, criticism, and so on. Particularly, I think a lot of our board members see how hardworking the staff is, and even though they might have a concern, they might be a little bit reluctant to say, I'm not sure person X has quite done what they said they would do. I'll be a bit provocative here in saying, given the trajectories of government funding, and we may see that change, we're unlikely to. If one were to look globally, we are seeing government funding as a percentage of total revenues of the cultural sector reducing everywhere in the world. So it would be nice to find this nirvana where that's not true. That nirvana does not exist. As such, if your board is not able to either make or get significant donations, I would ask why they're on the board. And some people would counter me with that and say, well, are you trying to create a rich board, an affluent board? In an ideal world, I wouldn't have to do that, but we are in a world where philanthropy, much like many of the last 1,000 years, patronage is very essential to what we do, is at the fore of making things happen. Some would argue, what role should artists have on our board? We have 2 orchestra members who attend every board meeting. Like me, they're excused from the in-camera sessions. But I would say from an artistic insight perspective, I have 150 staff at the TSO, 90 musicians. We have more ideas than we ever could possibly put into action. So the idea of having board members who are there for their artistic insights actually would probably make my head explode in terms of already trying to stretch too much forward. So in our view, I think the board at the TSO at this stage, we're really looking at the strategic input and advice, going through all of the sort of key accountability, financial issues, and so on, all the key governance pieces Robert's outlined. Also a board that's asking the tough questions. Are we reflecting the city? We're not reflecting the city. If one were to look at our major cultural institutions, you do not see Toronto at many of them ever, if one were to be honest and look at the content on stage, the audiences we connect with. That is something a strategic plan needs to address. Evolving economic models and so on. We do need a board to be a fundraising board. If we are going to compete with New York, compete with Chicago, compete with other major centers where the boards are fundraising boards. It would be a bit folly to think, well, we won't have to be concerned with that. That's not very realistic. So I would say a lot of these key elements are obviously essential to driving us forward. A lot of pushback around whether having an affluent board, or frankly even if having a hyper-reliance on donations skews the artistic mandate of an institution. I would say in my experience, and I've been running institutions for 15 years, it's the exact opposite. Most of the private sector investments that I've received or have been made in favor of my institutions have been done so typically really without strings of any kind. Whereas government funding, of course, we've got fairly comprehensive front-end application processes, quarterly reports, peer review assessments, and so on. So in terms of having to contort to receive funding, I'll be a bit provocative and suggest we often have to contort more for government funding than for a private sector contribution. So I think I've probably been provocative enough. What do we disagree on? Strategy, I think.
Strategy. To me, one of the committees should be a strategic planning committee of the board. The strategic planning committee works with management, and together they develop the strategic plan, which then gets reviewed, depending on the organization, probably not annually, but every few years, and you should have a 5-year plan. You should know, there's that old line, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. If you work for me, you've heard that so many times, you're sick of it. But you must know where you're going, you must have a plan, and it needs to be certainly generated from management, but board input and unified in support coming from both management and board. So I see it as a joint effort and bringing it together.